So I am starting off by doing social distancing story time, right? The world is stressful. So I want to do something fun and comforting for everybody. And what's more fun and comforting than story time? Uh, yeah, story time. It's great. I loved it growing up. I still love reading out loud. For me, like I just why do we stop reading aloud once we leave school? I think it's silly. So I'm going to read books out loud to you. Due to copyright, we are stuck doing public domain books, but that's okay. It leaves us with some great classics. I'm going to start with Pride and Prejudice, perennial favorite. Love it. Maybe then we'll move on to like some Sherlock Holmes stories, and then who knows? Maybe get a little gothic with some Jane Eyre, and then maybe we'll get into some horror with like the original horror, sci-fi, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Who knows? We got lots of time, because who knows how long we're going to be quarantining and social distancing. But in the midst of all that, I'm going to do my best for every 7 p.m. I'll be right here reading some stories out loud to you. Uh, I want to preface by starting with an apology. I tend to slip into very bad accents when I'm reading. So if you are someone who actually speaks with like a British accent or a Southern accent or any of the ones I accidentally and unconsciously start to slip into and it's very bad, many apologies. I'm super sorry. Okay, we're going to start with Jane Austen's classic Pride and Prejudice, and we're just going to read one chapter a night. So, like, come back tomorrow at 7 p.m. for the next chapter. But if you're here with me at the beginning, here we go. Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. "But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. "You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." This was invitation enough. "Why, my dear, you must know. Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately that he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of the week." "What is his name?" "Bingley." "Is he married or single?" "Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4 or 5 thousand a year. What a fine thing for our girls!" "How so? How can it affect them?" "Ah, my dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, "how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I'm thinking of his marrying one of them." "Is that his design in settling here?" "Design? Nonsense! How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes." "I see no reason for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will still be better, for as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley might like you best of the party." "My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty." "In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of." "But, my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood." "It is more than I engage for, I assure you." "But Consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go merely on that account, for in general, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. You're over-scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls, though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie. I desire you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, and I'm sure she's not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humored as Lydia. But you are always giving her the preference. They have none of them much to recommend them, replied he. They are all silly and ignorant, like other girls, but Lizzie has something more of quickness than her sisters. Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my poor nerves. You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old companions. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least. Ah, you do not know what I suffer. But I hope you will get over it, and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood. Well, it'll be no use to us if 20 should come, since you will not visit them. Depend upon it, my dear, that when there are 20, I will visit them all. Mr. Bennet was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. Okay, that went quick. That's the end of chapter 1. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. for chapter 2 of Pride and Prejudice. Thanks for coming by. Bye.